Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us while we launch the SADC Research Bootcamp report for theme 3. And I'm joined by Dr. Manoah Muchanga from the University of Zambia, who's going to be our guest for today as the lead of the Research Bootcamp theme 3. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you, Doc.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Good morning, and good morning all the viewers out there from wherever you are watching us from. We are so glad that you are able to join us. I'm so happy that you are able to host me here, and I'm very much humbled. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doc. Doc, just maybe before we get into the report itself, would you mind telling us about your involvement and your role in the Research Bootcamp?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, I would want to first and foremost say that this has been a very exciting and transformative engagement. I think since May up to today, I've just been thinking about how exciting it has been. It's like yesterday, but it's about 3 months now have lapsed. I've been thinking and reflecting about how the youth are being affected by COVID-19, those who are in school and in universities and colleges. And the engagement has been very enlightening, and I was privileged to be the lead in the thematic area number 3, which was looking at the educational lives of the excluded youth in the SADC region. Yes, so I worked together with my fellow researchers within the selected SADC countries, and it was so exciting to meet people virtually and to establish a networking and to co-produce some knowledge that can best inform policy decisions.
You mentioned excluded youth. What do you mean by excluded youth?
Yes, an excluded youth is, according to the regional perspective, any person that is enrolled in school or university between the age of 10 and 35, and this person is already disadvantaged, such that under COVID-19, he or she is not able to access all the most valuable resources, skills, and the capabilities to use the new forms of learning that have evolved under COVID-19. As you might be aware, all schools have been on a lockdown, and government and departments under the Ministry of Education have established new forms of teaching and learning. And these forms of learning and teaching are not accessible to this young learner. So that's what we mean by an excluded youth. So the exclusion is coming in the sense that this person or this individual is not able to access the content, the materials that are required for him to or her to access the lessons online, and that he or she is left behind, whereas others are learning, those who are more privileged than him or her. That's basically what we are talking about when we say an excluded youth.
Thank you for that explanation. I was if I had not read the report, I wouldn't have understood. But it was very important for us to make our audience also understand what it means by excluded youth. Now, yes. Tell me, what was the? I think you have also touched on the purpose of the thematic area 3. If you could tell us about the research team, you mentioned that you worked with other researchers across the region. The research team and the approach that which you followed when you were doing this research.
Fantastic. Actually, in our study, we used the phenomenological explorative nested study. That is to bring together different lived life experiences of these youth who are excluded. We didn't want those who don't have a first-hand experience, but we wanted those who have a lived experience. So a phenomenological approach or framework helped us quite very well, because we wanted the lived experiences of the youth. So we actually interviewed about 89 excluded youth from various countries in the sub-region. And I worked together with about other researchers from 8 countries, from Namibia, from Zimbabwe, from we had some from South Africa. So there was quite a good collection from different countries in the region. Yeah, so this helped us to work together and to co-produce the knowledge that we had to put up together the report that you're now able to read today.
Thanks, Doc. Look, while I was going through your report, in your study, you mentioned that excluded youth are more knowledgeable about symptoms of COVID-19 than its origin. Can you tell us more about that statement?
Fantastic. Yes, what we learned during the process of interaction with them, the participants were more conversant to explain the symptoms than the causes, in the sense that there are certain causes which they attributed to different things which perhaps may not really be the case, and which inherently implies that they are somehow excluded in terms of access to the right and correct information about COVID. And I'll give you an example. One of the participants just outrightly said COVID is caused by China. And they're trying to associate where it started from as being the main cause, instead of going to the actual virus that is causing this problem today. So premised on that, we're able to come up with that conclusion to say, I think the learners, because that came up quite frequently, others were able to maybe just conspire in their minds to say maybe there was some laboratory errors which have brought about this COVID-19, and yet that's perhaps not the truth. So in most cases, there were some statements which were not quite correct, and which means that it gives us an opportunity as educators to unleash more information that can be useful for the general public, because there could be many other youth who are, perhaps even adults, who are not fully aware of the causes of COVID-19. But you find that the symptoms are quite more popularized. And I think maybe it could be that in the mainstream media, that's what is being marketed, because I've seen more of the symptoms of COVID being marketed, even in the brochures from the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health from our local context. And I think even online, they are talking more about the symptoms so that people can put up some preventative measures than what is causing the COVID itself.
All right. Now, just as an interesting part, which age group, did you pick up this conclusion from? Was it from the learners in the primary schools? Was it in middle school, in tertiaries? Which age group came strongly about this finding?
Absolutely. Actually, the misconception were more pronounced from the primary up to secondary level, but at tertiary level, most of the responses were quite accurate. But the misconception were more popular among secondary and primary participants, those who are in primary schools and secondary schools.
Okay, all right. No, that is interesting, Doc, because as tertiary university students, we need to be more cognizant and aware of these facts that are going around this COVID-19, because we need to also create awareness from our own space, from our own communities, so that we can also, share the facts and the reliable information back to communities as university students. And I'm glad that, this misconception was not coming out from them. I would be worried if that was the case.
Absolutely.
Now, Doc, if you could share with us some of the core challenges that the case studies revealed about how education and training systems in Southern Africa, in SADC in particular, are affected by and can respond to COVID-19.
First and foremost, I think the first challenge that came out so strongly across the board from primary up to tertiary is the issue of social distance. Because we are told that you can't get closer to your friend, you have to keep a meter. And I think this was even more serious among the young learners from primary up to secondary, because in most cases, the young learners do co-learning. They have to learn from one another in order for them to understand certain concepts. And from the experience with the participants, we came to learn that actually there are certain subjects where really a boy and a girl need to work together in order to help one another. And now because of the social distance, there came a problem, and every pupil was complaining, say, I have to now learn by myself because I can't consult my friend. And because of the psychological challenge, which also came out so strongly, because of this social distance, there are some psychological fears of one another. Say, perhaps my friend is carrying this virus, and it's like creating another form of exclusion amongst themselves, that kind of a stereotype. Say, you're suspecting your friend as a virus. You are suspecting your friend as something that is going to transmit to you. So at the end of the day, the pupils will not learn from one another. That was the first most challenge. And then the psychological stresses that have emerged as a result of these lockdowns, because pupils have been locked down for months now, and it's like impacting on them. They cannot visit the nearby neighbor, perhaps to maybe watch some online lesson together on a TV or on internet. They cannot do that. And those who are underprivileged already, who don't have access to TV, access to power connectivity, access to internet, they are already excluded. And then the other thing that came out quite interesting is the issue of the girl child. During this COVID-19 lockdown, a girl child is subjected to a lot of home chores, domestic tasks. Instead of doing academic work, they are subjected to doing home chores, as well as the boys maybe are busy studying. And I think one girl from my context, from the northern part of Zambia, actually complained so bitterly to say, I would love to study, and then I'm told, go and draw some water. After drawing water, I said, start cooking. After cooking, start sweeping. And this came out quite frequently among the girls also from other countries, from the rural context, that they are subjected to these home chores. And even those who have had access to maybe television and even internet, sometimes you find that these lessons are coinciding with the peak hours for home chores, such that they are not quite able to concentrate. You find that they have to rush to the kitchen, come back to the sitting room, so such that there's kind of a conflict of interest and the mix of priorities. At the end of the day, the lesson will end online on the TV without really picking the main content that the teacher is sharing. And the other thing that came out was that there was no that interaction, the chemistry between the teacher and the pupil, because when the teacher is explaining on TV or online, a pupil is not able to actually ask a question where they are not understood. And, asking the interactive process of teaching and learning is a very critical ingredient in order to achieve the desired goal at the end of the day. But this was not there. The teacher will just speak. And at the end of the day, a pupil has no one to ask a follow-up questions or maybe to engage the teacher for discussion so that they have more deeper insights about the topic that is being taught. And especially those seemingly technical subjects like mathematics, chemistry. After the teacher has finished teaching, that is the end, and you can't ask a follow-up question. So that lack of access to the physical access to the teacher and even the learning materials was one of the many challenges that the pupils and even the university students actually had experienced. And I think from the experience of the university context, we find that the teachers, the lecturers are basically just posting materials. And then when the students look at them, they cannot really digest what that means. And because there is no good access and interactivity, there is a problem even with the university students.
That's quite interesting. That's quite interesting. Yeah. In one of your findings, you mentioned electricity as part of one of the challenges that were coming out. Could you explain a bit on that? What the role that electricity plays in our learning and online learning as students and learners?
That's interesting, and one of the participants asked me a question to say, how can I learn on TV when we have no electricity? because for a TV to switch on, you need electricity. So in most rural parts of many SADC countries, there is no power connectivity there. So already that is, I would call it a social determinant for them. It's not working for them. They may have access to a TV, but there is no electricity. So internet to operate, you need electricity. So that became like a compounding factor, and it's increasing the exclusion that the pupils and the learners are already going through. And interestingly enough is that this issue of lack of connectivity to electricity did not just affect the young learners from primary, secondary, it was across the board. Even today, as we are talking, we are still under lockdown. There are students in the universities and colleges who are excluded because they have no access to electricity. When they left their campuses, they had to go back home. Some of them, and perhaps not some, majority of them are coming from poor families, and they have no access to electricity in the villages where they are staying. So at the end of the day, this electricity is increasing the exclusion, which is already happening. So they have no access to electricity, and they can't switch on a TV, they can't switch on internet, because for internet to work very well, there must be some form of electricity in place. So you may have an Android phone, but what if the battery goes down? You have to travel some longer distances into maybe the nearby CBD in order to connect and charge that phone for you to access the lessons online. So electricity became as a compounding factor and is increasing the exclusion that the young learners and the students in the university are already going through as far as learning is concerned in the study.
That is very interesting, Doc. That is very interesting. I mean, I'm sitting here in South Africa, we are experiencing some load shedding, and when there's load shedding, to some extent also internet, goes away. So if you had a lesson on the period where the load shedding is taking place in your area, you're definitely missing that lesson, and you get excluded.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think
from your side, from your findings, what is the conclusion? No, go on, Doc.
Yes, there's that point you have mentioned on load shedding. That's another thing. Coincidentally, COVID comes and then there's already load shedding almost across the region. There's so much load shedding, up to 8+ hours. There's no connectivity. That means even those who are in urban areas where there is proper internet connection, they have access to all these gadgets, they cannot, during certain periods of the day, access these lessons. And those who are presenting these TV programs themselves will go ahead, they will not wait for load shedding to end. And in most cases, they were not even repetitions, like repeated programs of teaching and learning process. They will just teach once, and after that, that is the end. So that means that even those who were privileged, to some extent, they were also excluded because of this load shedding that we're experiencing across the region. So load shedding is another issue. And even up to today, there's still load shedding. And even ourselves, when you're doing this research process, sometimes we'd fail to meet because there's load shedding. So we are just thinking to say, what about the learner out there? What is the experience like? So it has been very difficult, not only for the pupils and learners from rural context, but also in urban areas as far as the issue of electricity is concerned, because there's load shedding also. And then those who are in rural areas, they have no connectivity at all. There are only very few who have such access.
Thanks, Doc. That's interesting. Before we move into your recommendations, I just want to ask, in terms of, so the study, the purpose was to establish whether youth are excluded, particularly in the education space. What did you find? That did you find that to be your hypothesis to be correct or incorrect?
Actually, the hypothesis indeed was very correct in the sense that the youth are in a real sense excluded. And I think this is something that should have been well thought out before actually implementing online learning. The exclusion is real, and actually it is bringing in other forms of exclusion in the sense that there is a risk that some of the girl children might be exposed to other forms of discrimination. Some of them, before there is a lift on the lockdowns, may actually be found pregnant. Others may actually get married, especially those who are in rural areas where maybe they are living with their grandparents who may not really have a clear understanding why even their grandchildren are going to school. So because of that, there is a problem in the sense that if the pupil is staying, especially those who are in primary and secondary, are staying with guardians or parents who don't appreciate education, they may even forget about education. Some of them may be encouraged to get married at the end of the day. So it brings up the girl child especially is going to be deprived of her right to education at the end of the day. And as we are talking, my brother, we are talking about the SDG 4, and 4.7 is talking about quality education and quality and inclusive education for all. This may not be realized if perhaps this challenge is extended for some pupils because they are not getting the same quality and standard of education. So the exclusion is there. And even those who have access to education online or on TV, to some extent, the quality is compromised because I think across the board, this COVID-19 and the new form of learning has caught every country and government unawares, such that they were not prepared to invest in online learning. So at the end of the day, you put up measures hastily such that the quality at the end of the day is compromised as compared to if the learners were physically interacting with the teacher. So there's that fear that the exclusion may extend in terms of quality. The learners across the board are excluded from their right of access to quality education and quality educational content and resources.
Friends, look, it appears that, the girl child is more affected than the boy child in this whole exclusion. And in that note, Doc, what were your key recommendations, looking at all these findings that your study had, indicated?
Yes, I think there are many recommendations that were put across, and I think one of them is firstly, there's need to consider reopening schools, especially those who are in rural areas, because if this continues, this may cause so much repercussions on the progression of the pupils. Because in rural areas, yes, there's fear, but I think the cases there are extremely very low. I think this could be the case across the board. So the recommendation is that in rural areas, the pupils can actually, the schools can open, but subject to adherence. The boarding schools, I know that there are some pupils who have been sent back to from town, who are coming from town. Those who are in town can continue learning online, but those who are in rural areas, there's need to actually open schools for them to continue learning, but subject to strict adherence to all the public health guidelines regarding COVID-19. And then the other thing is there's need for strong protection for a girl child, especially during this lockdown, because they may be subjected to other forms of abuse and so on and so forth. Before we realize it, we may have a lot of COVID babies at the end of the day. So there's a recommendation that there should be strong girl child protection. And then besides that, in connection to the girl child, these online or TV lessons must be properly timed such that they are not placed at peak hours. And then there's need to increase access to these e-learning resources like Androids, TV, and also the telecommunication facilities and electricity connection, because this is going to increase at least access to online learning, without which there's going to be a big challenge. And I think one other challenge, recommendation that is worth thinking about is how these people living with disability, people with disability can be helped, because there came another exciting and quite saddening experience that the people who are, for example, of poor sight, poor hearing ability, they cannot hear, they can see on TV, but they cannot hear. So there's need to find modalities and technologies to help these colleagues and learners who are with disabilities, so that they learn in the same way as those who are more privileged.
That's interesting. So in your sampling, did you come across people that were living with disabilities?
Absolutely. Actually, we came about to, around 5 participants with disabilities, and the issue of social distancing came out quite strongly among them to say, for example, those who are blind, the only way they can learn together is to get closer to one another. And a blind person needs someone to lead him to the classroom, to the next convenient room, and to have access to the resources. Now, if you say there is social distance and everyone is scared of the next person to him or herself, it became more challenging for them in the sense that they are not able to access the nearby library because there's no one to lead them, because everyone wants to keep a distance away. And then there was also a challenge to do with the Braille. Those who are blind, they are not able to read the Braille because there's no Braille online, there's no Braille on TV, and so on and so forth. So there was a strong recommendation to say, if we may start thinking around technologies that can be more inclusive to those who are not able to read with their eyes, I think that would be very, very helpful to them. And also to focus, especially in trying to bridge up the gap that is there between those who are in urban areas and those who are in the rural areas, because the rural areas were found to be more affected and more excluded from these ongoing online learning platforms.
Interesting, thanks, Doc. Now, in your first recommendation that you mentioned, and I also saw it in your report, is about opening of schools. Of course, with strict adhering of government COVID-19 regulations and so forth. Don't you think, because there's a narrative that the ones that are in rural areas are more vulnerable because of their medical systems in the provinces or in the areas, and also because they live with grandparents and so forth. What is your take around that? Did you consider that when you make that recommendation?
Yes, it's quite a very delicate recommendation, but looking at urban learners, pupils, students themselves have access to internet, they have access to TVs and so on and so forth. But what about those who are in rural areas where there is no internet, there are no telecommunication infrastructure, there is no electricity, and yet at the end of the day, both the urban learners and rural learners have to be subjected to the same examination. So that's why that recommendation came in. It is something that has to be considered carefully so that we don't open up the floodgates of more infections. But if there is more strict adherence, it can really help. Or perhaps to do the blended method of learning where maybe instead of meeting for 5 days from Monday up to Friday, you can say we meet on Monday, Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you meet online. But of course, with some access to these online learning resources, access to gadgets that are required, that can help us a lot. So the issue of opening schools in rural areas, of course, is sensitive, but it can be something that can be done carefully for the sake of making the learners in the rural areas also progress at the same rate with those who are in urban areas, because the urban learners have access to what? To these resources. They can easily access the resources, even download, but for those in rural areas, there's absolutely nothing. So hence, that recommendation to carefully open schools for rural areas as long as they are actually adhering to these strict public health guidelines.
Thanks for clarifying that, Doc. I mean, in conclusion, Doc, if you were to wrap up this study in just a minute, what would you say? Tell the audience out there, those that are excluded and those that have got the access through the gadgets and the e-learnings. What would you say to them?
My quick message is that COVID-19 is real and it is affecting everyone. So we need to take precautionary measures and to try by all means to learn within the means that are available, and to make sure that everyone is not left behind. Not one person should be left behind, but means and measures should be put in place in order for everyone to be included, because we are looking at quality and inclusive education for everyone. That's my last message as we are winding up.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manoah Muchanga. for your insight, and the report is actually quite insightful. As a young person, I relate to that report, being excluded and being inclusive. It's something that I relate to. And also as a student, I'm still a student myself in the learning of higher institution. And I relate to many of the, the findings that you got from the study, and some of the recommendations. I fully relate to them. Thank you very much for your time, and we also like to thank our audience who had taken the time to come and share your findings from the thematic area, theme 4, theme 3 for the SADC research bootcamp. Thank you very much, and all the best. And I look forward to visiting Zambia in the near future.
Thank you very much for hosting me, and looking forward to meeting you. And thank you very much all the viewers who joined us across the continent, the region, and different countries. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.